$40. Farmer bought a small house, but it came with two Apache sisters living there already. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. The wind howled through the open fields as Frank Thompson made his way to his new home. A small, rundown house just outside the sleepy town of Riverton, bought for a mere $40. The price had been too good to pass up, and Frank, a quiet farmer from the Midwest, had long dreamed of escaping the hustle and bustle of city life. He had spent the last few months working hard to save enough money for a fresh start, and now, at last, it seemed like his dream was within reach. The house was old, the roof sagging in places, and the windows were cracked. But it was his, and that was all that mattered. He had no neighbors for miles, just the endless stretch of open land. He felt a sense of freedom as he stood on the porch, breathing in the fresh, dry air. But little did he know, his new life was about to take a turn he never saw coming. As he walked inside the house, he was struck by the silence. The place was empty, the furniture old and covered in dust, but there was something off about it, something that didn't sit right. He could feel eyes on him, though no one was there. His hand brushed against the wall, and a chill ran down his spine. He shrugged it off, telling himself it was just the wind or his imagination. But then, the door creaked. Frank froze. He was sure he had locked it before entering. Slowly, cautiously, he turned around to face the door. His heart skipped a beat as he saw two figures standing in the doorway. They were young women, their faces a mixture of curiosity and caution. Their clothes were worn, and their eyes were wide, scanning him as though they had been waiting for him. The taller of the two spoke first, her voice low but clear. "You bought this place?" she asked. Frank, still in shock, nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did. It's mine." He wasn't sure what else to say. The younger woman stepped forward slightly, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "We live here," she said simply. Frank blinked, confused. "What do you mean, you live here?" The older woman, who looked to be in her late 20s, stepped forward and locked eyes with him. "We've been here for years," she replied, her tone steady but firm. "This is our home." Frank didn't know what to think. He had paid for the house, signed all the paperwork, and everything seemed above board. But here were these two women, standing in his living room, claiming the house as their own. "I don't understand," he said, his voice uncertain. "I just bought this house. It's mine now." The older woman looked at him for a moment, and then, with a calmness that surprised him, she said, "You don't know the full story." She stepped inside, and the younger woman followed, her gaze never leaving Frank. "You're not the first to buy this place," she continued, "but you'll be the one to make a decision." Frank frowned, his mind racing. What kind of decision was she talking about? He had just bought the house, hadn't he? But as he looked into their eyes, he felt a strange unease creeping in. What had he gotten himself into? Frank stared at the two women, still trying to process what they had just said. His new home, his fresh start, now seemed uncertain. They said they had been living here for years, yet the house had only been available for sale a few weeks ago. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. The older woman stepped closer, her movements calm and deliberate. "We've lived here longer than you think," she said, her voice steady. "This house is part of something much bigger than just land and walls." Frank furrowed his brow, not quite understanding. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's just a house, right?" The younger woman, who seemed to be in her early 20s, glanced around nervously, her eyes darting toward the windows, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "No, it's not just a house," she replied softly. "This place, it's sacred. It has history." Frank took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He had always believed in starting fresh, but this was beginning to feel like more than he had bargained for. "Sacred? What are you talking about?" The older woman smiled, her eyes softening. "You don't know the whole story yet," she said, "but you will soon enough. The house wasn't just abandoned. It was left for a reason." Frank's curiosity grew, but so did his unease. "Left for a reason? By whom?" he asked, stepping closer, hoping for some clarity. The woman hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke again, her voice low. By our people. The Apache. Frank's stomach churned. Apache. He had heard the stories, of course, but he never expected to be part of one. He was just a farmer, trying to escape his past and find peace. This wasn't what he had imagined. I don't understand, he muttered. If this is your home, why am I here? The younger woman stepped forward, her eyes intense. Because you were meant to be here, she said, almost as if it were inevitable. This house, it's a place of protection. A sanctuary. Frank's confusion deepened. A sanctuary? From what? The older woman nodded toward the door. From what's coming. Frank felt a chill crawl up his spine. He had no idea what they meant, but the words sent a wave of anxiety through him. The world outside seemed suddenly more dangerous than he had realized. He had thought the isolation of this place was its greatest feature. But now, it felt like a trap. A place to hide from something far bigger than he had ever anticipated. What's coming? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The older woman stepped closer, lowering her voice. The tribe, she said simply. The people who once lived here are coming back. They want what's rightfully theirs. Frank's heart skipped a beat. They? Who are they? What are you talking about? The younger woman's gaze grew distant, as if remembering something from the past. The Apache, she said. Our people. Frank's mind was spinning. He had no idea what they were talking about, but it was clear that the house, this place, was more than just a forgotten piece of property. It was part of a larger story. A story that had been waiting for him to become part of it. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud noise outside. Frank's heart raced as he quickly moved toward the window. He could see dust rising in the distance, and as it drew closer, he realized it was a group of riders. Apache riders. He turned to the two women, his voice shaking. What do we do now? The older woman gave him a long, measured look. Now we prepare. She moved toward the door, her expression unreadable. It's time for you to learn what this place truly means. Frank followed her, his mind reeling. He had no idea what he was walking into, but one thing was certain. His quiet life was over. And the Apache were coming to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs. Frank stood in silence, watching the dust cloud grow larger as it approached his property. The sounds of hooves grew louder with every passing second, and a knot formed in his stomach. He had no idea what to expect, but he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He turned to the two women who had been nothing but cryptic since their arrival. They had told him the house was sacred, but now he was starting to believe it. The older woman, whose name he had not yet learned, stood by the window, her eyes narrowed as she observed the riders. The younger woman, who had been quiet for most of the time, seemed more agitated, her hands trembling slightly. Are you sure about this? Frank asked, his voice shaking slightly. What do they want? The older woman didn't look away from the window. They want what is theirs, she said quietly, her voice calm, but with an edge of authority. This house, this land, it was once our people's. We've been waiting for the right moment to return. Frank's mind raced. The more he heard, the less sense it made. But I bought this house. I paid for it, he protested. It's mine now. The younger woman turned to him, her eyes full of a mix of pity and frustration. You don't understand, she said softly. It's never been about the house. It's about the land, the history. It's always been ours. Frank was about to respond when the first rider appeared at the edge of the property. The figure was tall, dressed in traditional Apache clothing, and rode with a presence that commanded attention. As he rode closer, Frank could see the others following behind him, their faces painted in war paint, their eyes focused ahead with grim determination. Here they come, the older woman whispered, stepping back from the window. Stay calm. This is the moment. Frank swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He had no idea what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. He was no longer in control. The riders stopped just outside the house, their horses stamping the ground as they dismounted. Frank could see their muscles rippling under their clothing, their eyes sharp as they surveyed the surroundings. The leader, a man who appeared to be in his mid-40s, approached the house first. His gaze locked with Frank's, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Frank felt the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Finally, the man spoke. You are the new owner? His voice was low and rough, with a strong Apache accent. Frank nodded, unsure of what to say. I am, he replied. The man studied him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked at the two women who were standing by the door. "You should not be here," he said to them, his tone firm but not unkind. The older woman stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. "This land belongs to our people," she said, her voice steady. "And it will again." Frank looked from the man to the two women, his mind struggling to make sense of the situation. The leader of the riders turned back to him, his expression softening slightly. "You've bought the house," he said. "But the house is not the issue. The issue is the land and what it represents." Frank swallowed. He had no idea what he was supposed to do. This was nothing like the peaceful life he had imagined when he first came here. The leader continued, "We're not here to fight you, but you need to understand something. This land was stolen from us long ago. We've waited for generations for the right moment to return, and now that moment has come." Frank looked at the two women again. "And what does that mean for me?" he asked. The younger woman spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. "It means you have a choice," she said. "You can leave, and we will let you go in peace. Or you can stay, and help us reclaim what is ours." Frank stood there, frozen. His entire life had just been upended in a matter of moments. He thought he was in control, that he could live a quiet life, but now he was faced with a choice that would change everything. He looked back at the riders, their faces filled with purpose, their presence heavy in the air. It was clear that this was no ordinary dispute. It was a battle for something much larger than any of them. And as he looked back at the two women, he realized that he had become part of their story, whether he wanted to be or not. The riders remained motionless, their eyes locked on Frank. The tension in the air was palpable, and Frank could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had never been part of anything like this before. His entire life had been one of hard work, solitude, and simplicity, but now, standing face to face with these Apache riders, he was forced to confront a reality he hadn't prepared for. The leader, a tall man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, spoke again. "You've heard our words," he said, his voice low and steady. "Now you must choose." Frank swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. "Choose?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You're asking me to choose between leaving and staying?" The leader nodded. "Yes. You have no claim to this land. You have no right to it. But we are offering you a choice. Leave, and you may go in peace. Stay, and you will help us." Frank felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was something entirely different. He looked at the two women standing behind him. They had been silent for the most part, but now they were looking at him expectantly. The younger woman stepped forward, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "We need your help," she said, her voice trembling. "This land is part of who we are. We've been waiting for this moment for so long. Please, don't turn your back on us." Frank looked out at the riders again. Their faces were hard, their expressions unreadable, but there was something in their eyes, something that told him this wasn't just a dispute over land. This was about something much deeper, something rooted in history and culture. The older woman spoke next, her voice calm and resolute. "We can't do this without you," she said. "You've already made your choice by coming here. Now you must decide if you will stand with us or against us." Frank felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. He had come here to escape everything, to start fresh. But now he realized there was no such thing as a fresh start when the past was so deeply ingrained in the land and the people who lived on it. He looked back at the leader of the Apache riders, his mind racing. "What happens if I stay?" he asked. The leader's gaze hardened. "If you stay, you will fight with us. You will protect what is ours. You will help us reclaim this land." Frank hesitated. He had never been a fighter. He had never wanted to be involved in anything that wasn't his business. But something inside him stirred. He had always believed in standing up for what was right, even if it was difficult. "And if I leave?" he asked, his voice steady. The leader's expression softened, but only slightly. "If you leave, you will live to see another day. But you will never truly be free. The land will always be there, calling to you." Frank turned to the two women, who were watching him intently. He saw the fear in their eyes, but also a quiet determination. They had already made their decision. The question was, would he? He looked back at the leader, his heart heavy with the weight of the choice. "I don't know what I can do to help you," he said, his voice low. "But I can't leave. Not without understanding what this really means." The leader nodded, his expression unreadable. "Then you've made your choice," he said. "Welcome to our fight." As Frank stood there, surrounded by the riders, the two women, and the weight of the decision he had just made, he realized that his life would never be the same. The past had come crashing into his future, and there was no turning back. He had chosen a side, and now he would have to live with the consequences. The decision was made. Frank had chosen to stand with the Apache riders, though the weight of the choice still pressed down on him like a 1,000-pound stone. The leader, who had introduced himself as Dakota, nodded solemnly, his face betraying no emotion. "Good," he said simply. "Then we prepare." The group began moving swiftly, almost as if they had anticipated this moment for years. Dakota's voice rang out, giving orders to the riders. "We'll move out at dawn. No one leaves the house." Frank looked back at the two women, who had been silent throughout the exchange. The older woman, who Frank now knew as Ayana, stepped toward him. "Are you ready for what's coming?" she asked, her voice low but clear. Frank wasn't sure how to respond. Was he ready? He wasn't even sure what was coming. But one thing was certain. He had made a choice, and there was no turning back now. "I have no idea what I'm doing," he admitted. "But I'll do what I can." Ayana gave him a small, knowing smile. "You're stronger than you think," she said. Her words gave him some comfort, but the uncertainty was still there, nagging at him. As the night wore on, the tension in the house grew. Frank could feel it in the air, thick and heavy. The riders were preparing for something, but Frank wasn't sure what. He had no experience with war or conflict. All he had ever known was farming. But now, he was about to be thrust into something far bigger than he had ever imagined. The hours passed slowly, each minute feeling like an eternity. Frank lay on the couch, his mind racing as he tried to sleep, but the sound of hooves outside kept him awake. He couldn't help but wonder what was happening out there. Were they just preparing, or was something more imminent? Around midnight, Dakota came to him. "It's time," he said simply. "Follow me." Frank stood, his legs shaky. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew that whatever it was about to change everything. He followed Dakota outside, where the riders were already mounted and ready to go. The moonlight cast long shadows over the land, and Frank could see the faces of the riders, all wearing the same focused, determined expression. Dakota handed Frank a horse. "Ride with us," he said. "You're one of us now." Frank nodded, still unsure of what exactly he was getting into, but knowing that this was the path he had chosen. They rode through the night, the sound of hooves echoing in the still air. Frank tried to keep up, but the speed of the riders was overwhelming. Dakota led them toward the valley, where the Apache were waiting. As they approached, Frank saw the flickering of torches in the distance. They were close. When they reached the edge of the valley, Dakota halted. The riders followed suit, their horses shifting restlessly beneath them. "This is it," Dakota said, his voice filled with a sense of quiet authority. "We'll make our stand here." Frank looked around, trying to take in everything. In the distance, he could see the silhouettes of soldiers marching toward them, their weapons glinting in the dim light. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had never imagined he would be here, preparing to fight for a cause he barely understood. But there was no turning back now. Dakota turned to him. "This is the moment," he said. "If you stand with us, you stand for something bigger than yourself. Are you ready?" Frank took a deep breath, the weight of the moment crashing down on him. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he had already chosen his side. "I'm ready," he said, his voice firm despite the doubt that lingered in his mind. Dakota gave him a nod of approval. "Then fight with us," he said. The soldiers were closing in, and Frank knew that the battle was about to begin. He had no idea what the outcome would be, but one thing was certain: his life would never be the same. He looked at the riders, at the Apache who had accepted him as one of their own, and he knew that no matter what happened next, he was no longer just a farmer. He was part of something much bigger, something that had been building for generations. The wind howled through the valley, and Frank braced himself for what was to come. The soldiers were nearly upon them, their formation tightening as they moved closer to the valley where Frank and the Apache riders had made their stand. The air was thick, with tension, the sound of hooves and the soft rustle of the wind carrying an eerie weight. Frank sat tall on his horse, his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to steady his breath. He had never been in battle before, never imagined he would find himself in such a situation. Yet here he was, part of something bigger than himself, something that had been brewing for generations. Takoda rode beside him, his face unreadable as he surveyed the advancing soldiers. His expression was calm, almost detached, but Frank could see the fire burning in his eyes. "Stay close," Takoda said, his voice low but firm. "We fight as one. We protect each other." Frank nodded, though his nerves were on edge. He had no weapons, no training, but he had made his choice. He would stand with the Apache, no matter the cost. The soldiers drew nearer, and Takoda signaled to the others. The Apache riders moved into position, ready to defend their land, their people, their history. Frank felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He was about to become part of something far bigger than himself. The sound of a horn echoed through the valley, signaling the start of the battle. The Apache riders charged forward, their horses kicking up dust as they raced toward the soldiers. Frank hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but then he heard Takoda's voice again. "Ride," Takoda urged. "Now." Frank spurred his horse forward, his body tensing as he followed the riders. The soldiers were lined up in perfect formation, rifles aimed, ready to fire. But the Apache were swift and fierce, weaving in and out of the soldiers' line of fire with practiced precision. Frank couldn't believe the speed and skill of the Apache riders. They moved like shadows, dodging bullets and striking back with deadly force. The soldiers, caught off guard by the ferocity of the attack, struggled to maintain their formation. Frank had no idea what he was doing, but he followed Takoda, moving with the riders as they circled the soldiers, cutting off their escape routes. The sound of gunfire filled the air, but the Apache riders were relentless, their arrows and spears finding their mark with terrifying accuracy. Frank felt a surge of adrenaline as he watched the chaos unfold around him. He had never seen anything like it before, how the Apache fought with such unity, such purpose. It was like they were one, not just a group of riders, but a force of nature, unstoppable and powerful. Takoda's voice cut through the noise, sharp and commanding. "We press forward," he shouted. "They cannot escape. This land is ours." Frank's heart raced as he followed, his grip tightening on the reins of his horse. The soldiers were retreating now, their lines breaking as they fled from the onslaught. But the Apache were not done. They moved swiftly, cutting off every route of escape, making sure no soldier would leave the valley alive. Frank's mind was spinning, the events unfolding around him too fast to comprehend. The battle seemed to stretch on forever, but finally, the soldiers broke, scattering in every direction. The Apache riders stood victorious, their eyes scanning the battlefield, ensuring that no threat remained. Frank looked around, his heart still pounding. He had made it through, but the weight of the battle hung heavy on his chest. Takoda rode up beside him, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. "You did well," he said, his voice calm. "You fought with us." Frank nodded, though the words felt hollow. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "I never imagined I would be part of something like this." Takoda's eyes softened, his gaze understanding. "You are part of it now," he said simply. "This land, this fight, it is all ours. You have helped us reclaim what was taken." Frank looked around at the Apache riders, their faces worn but proud. He had helped them. He had fought for something he hadn't fully understood, but now, standing on the battlefield, he realized that he had found his place. This was where he was meant to be, with the Apache, standing together to protect what was rightfully theirs. The dust settled slowly over the battlefield, the once chaotic scene now eerily still. Frank sat on his horse, his body aching, his mind struggling to process everything that had just transpired. The soldiers had retreated, but the victory felt empty. He had fought for something he barely understood, yet he had been part of it. He had helped the Apache reclaim what was theirs. The Apache riders began to regroup, their faces solemn but filled with a quiet pride. Frank watched them, his heart still pounding from the battle. Takoda rode up beside him, his gaze steady and thoughtful. "You fought well," Takoda said, his voice low. "You are one of us now." Frank nodded, his words caught in his throat. He didn't know how to respond. He had done what he had to do, but now that the fight was over, the weight of it all settled in. "What happens now?" Frank asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Takoda's eyes met his, and for the first time, Frank saw a hint of weariness in the older man's face. "Now, we rebuild," Takoda replied. But this fight, it's only the beginning. Frank didn't understand. What do you mean? He asked. Dakota looked toward the horizon, his expression distant. The land is ours, yes. But there are others who will try to take it from us again. The battle doesn't end with just one victory. Frank's stomach tightened. He had thought that by helping the Apache defeat the soldiers, they had secured their land. But now it seemed like there was more to it. So what do we do? Frank asked. Dakota turned to him, his eyes narrowing with resolve. We protect it, he said simply. We protect each other. Frank didn't speak. He had never been a protector. He had only ever known how to grow crops, tend to animals, and survive. But now, standing beside Dakota, he realized that survival wasn't enough. He had made a choice, and it came with consequences. The Apache were his people now. He couldn't turn back. Dakota led Frank to the edge of the valley, where the other riders were gathering. The women, Ayanna and the younger one, who Frank had come to know as Sonny, were there too, their faces still hard with the tension of battle. Ayanna looked at Frank as he approached, her expression unreadable. You did well today, she said, her voice steady. But this is just the beginning. Frank nodded. He didn't know what else to say. He felt out of place among them. But he knew that he couldn't undo what he had done. We need to move quickly, Dakota said, his voice commanding. The soldiers will regroup, and we can't afford to be caught off guard again. He turned to Frank. You will ride with us, help us secure the land. Frank swallowed. He had never ridden in battle before, but now it seemed. That was the only way forward. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with it. I'm ready, he said, his voice steady despite the fear that still clung to him. Dakota gave him a small nod of approval before turning to the others. We ride at dawn, he announced. The Apache riders mounted their horses, ready to move out. Frank climbed onto his own horse, the familiar weight of the saddle beneath him. He could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty of what was to come. They were no longer just fighting for land. They were fighting for their way of life. And Frank, though uncertain of his place in all of this, knew that he would fight alongside them. He had no other choice. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, they set off, moving through the valley, ready for whatever came next. Frank's mind raced as they rode, his thoughts jumbled. He had once believed that the land could be bought, that he could escape to a quiet life of farming and solitude. But now he knew the truth. The land wasn't just land. It was a battle, a legacy, a way of life. And he was part of that fight now, whether he was ready or not. The sun was still low on the horizon as the Apache riders moved through the valley. Frank rode alongside them, his heart heavy with the weight of the choices he had made. The land stretched out before him, vast and unforgiving, and yet, there was something beautiful about it. It was wild, untamed, and it was his now, along with the Apache. He had come a long way from the quiet farmer he had once been, and he wasn't sure where this new path would take him. Dakota, the leader of the Apache riders, rode beside him, his expression steady and calm. The older man had been a constant source of strength throughout the battle, but now, as they rode toward the unknown, Frank could see the tension in his eyes. Do you ever doubt it? Frank asked, his voice barely rising above the wind. This fight, this land, do you ever wonder if it's worth it? Dakota glanced at him, his eyes dark with the weight of years spent fighting for a cause that never seemed to end. Every day, he said softly, but it's not just about the land. It's about our people. It's about our history, our future. Frank nodded, understanding more than he ever had before. He had thought this was just about property, just about buying a house. But now, he realized, it was much bigger than that. They weren't just fighting for land. They were fighting to preserve everything they had ever known. As the riders moved forward, Frank's thoughts were interrupted by a shout from the front of the group. One of the scouts, a young Apache woman named Sonny, had spotted something in the distance. Dakota signaled for the group to halt, his eyes scanning the horizon. Frank followed his gaze, trying to make out what had caught Sonny's attention. There, on the far side of the valley, was a plume of smoke rising into the sky. It's them, Dakota said, his voice low and full of resolve. They've come for us. Frank's stomach tightened. He knew the soldiers weren't done. He had seen how determined they were, how they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But this time, it was different. The Apache were ready. Frank could feel the shift in the air, the change in the riders around him. They had fought for this land once, and they would fight again, But now they had something more. They had each other. Dakota turned to the group, his voice carrying over the wind. "We ride to meet them," he said. "We protect what is ours." The riders nodded in unison, their expressions fierce, determined. Frank could see the fire in their eyes, and for the first time, he felt it in himself too. He had been an outsider, unsure of where he fit in, but now, as they rode toward the approaching soldiers, he knew his place. He was with them. He was one of them. The valley grew still as they made their way toward the smoke, the sound of hooves echoing through the silence. Frank could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, but he forced himself to focus on the task at hand. They were going to fight again, but this time, they weren't just defending their land. They were defending their legacy, their future. The riders tightened their formation as they reached the edge of the valley, where the soldiers were waiting. Frank could see them. Now, a line of men dressed in military garb, rifles slung over their shoulders. But the Apache were not intimidated. They rode forward with purpose, their movements synchronized, like a well-oiled machine. Dakota gave one final command, his voice steady and commanding. "We fight for our future," he said. "We fight for our people." The battle began in an instant. The soldiers fired first, their guns ringing out in the still air, but the Apache riders were faster, their arrows finding their marks with deadly precision. Frank followed Dakota, his eyes focused on the enemy, his hands gripping the reins of his horse. He had never ridden like this before, never fought like this before, but now it felt natural. It felt like he was meant to be here, meant to fight for this land, for these people. The battle raged on, the sounds of gunfire and arrows filling the air. Frank's mind was a blur, his body moving on instinct, following the Apache riders as they fought with everything they had. They were not just fighting for land. They were fighting for their survival. And Frank, for the first time in his life, knew what it was like to fight for something that mattered. The soldiers retreated again, just as they had before, but this time, the Apache were not giving up. Dakota's voice rang out over the chaos. "We will not back down." The Apache riders pressed forward, their determination unwavering. Frank's heart surged with pride as he fought alongside them. They were not just defending their land. They were defending their way of life. The battle had raged for hours, the sounds of gunfire and the thundering of hooves echoing across the valley. Frank was tired, his body aching from the fight, but his resolve had never been stronger. The Apache riders had pressed the soldiers back, inch by inch, with relentless force and determination. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the battlefield, the soldiers, now broken and disorganized, started to retreat. Dakota rode at the front of the Apache, his face hard, his eyes focused. "They will not return," he said, his voice steady as he gave his orders. "We have won this day." The Apache riders cheered, their victory ringing out across the valley, but Frank could see the exhaustion in their eyes. They had fought not just for land, but for their future, and for the first time, Frank realized what that truly meant. As the dust settled and the last of the soldiers fled, Frank's mind began to clear. The adrenaline had faded, and the weight of what had just happened started to sink in. He had fought alongside the Apache, and together, they had reclaimed what was theirs. But the battle had come at a cost. He looked around at the faces of the riders, some smiling in relief, others standing tall with pride, but there was no joy in their eyes. They had won, yes, but the fight was far from over. Dakota turned to Frank, his face softening slightly. "You fought well today," he said, his voice calm. "You are no longer just an outsider. You are one of us." Frank nodded, but his heart was heavy. He had never imagined that he would be a part of something like this. He had come to this land looking for peace, but now he understood that peace was something they would have to fight for every day. As the Apache riders began to gather their things and prepare to leave the battlefield, Dakota approached Frank once more. "We will return to the valley," Dakota said. "We must fortify our position, prepare for what is to come." Frank followed him, his heart still pounding in his chest. The valley was theirs now, but it was clear that there would always be those who would try to take it from them. The fight for survival, for their future, was never truly over. They had won this battle, but the war was far from finished. Dakota stopped and turned to face Frank. "This land, this fight, it's not just about us," he said, his eyes searching Frank's. "It's about all those who came before us, and all those who will come after us." We are fighting for a legacy. Frank could feel the weight of Takoda's words, the truth in them settling deep within him. He had become part of something much larger than himself, something that had been shaped by history and would continue long after he was gone. Takoda's gaze softened. You have a place here, Frank. You have earned it. Frank felt a surge of emotion he hadn't expected. For the first time since arriving, he felt as though he belonged. He wasn't just a farmer anymore. He wasn't just a man trying to escape his past. He was part of a future, part of a people who had fought for everything they had, and who would continue to fight for what was rightfully theirs. As the Apache riders made their way back to their camp, Frank followed them, his heart lighter than it had been in days. The valley stretched out before them, vast and open, a symbol of the future they were building together. It would not be easy. There would be more battles, more challenges ahead. But for the first time, Frank was ready. He had found his place, and he would stand with the Apache, fighting not just for the land, but for the future of the people he had come to call his own. The sun set on the valley, and as Frank looked out across the land, he knew that this was just the beginning. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to fight for.